My name is Kathleen Hartnett-White. I'm Senior Fellow and Director of the Armstrong Institute for Energy and Environment at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I was pleased to be invited to speak at this about something that I think is kind of overlooked in all the many discussions for or against global warming, and that is how utterly dependent our modern civilization is on a massive use of abundant, concentrated energy and fossil fuels. And what the use of those fuels has done as far as human improvement, about 200 years ago, the average lifespan across the world was 24 or 25 years old because so many children died before they were 15. Now, in our country, in the United States, it's 79. Income per capita has vastly improved, certainly more in modern developed countries, the United States and Europe, but the United Nations recently said that more poverty has been alleviated in this world in the last 50 than in the last 500. And those have to do with energy inputs into life. Life changes when you're not burning sticks as your cook stove in a house made of bamboo in sub-Saharan Africa. Life changes with even the most crude form of electricity that comes in. And it's so improved the human condition. And one of its most profound gifts, it's what I like to talk about as the gift of energy, is time. So instead of our life being dictated by trying to get the basic necessities, only using our own muscle, we have the mobility we have, the machines we have that perform the work we otherwise would have to do, has given us time. And that was not the case for the bulk of the human population only a couple hundred years ago. In England itself, you had the wealthy elites, but you had the vast majority of the population that really lived subsistence poverty lives. So what this energy has given us is of such vast importance. I think climate policies, which on the basis of increasingly weaker science, that can't justify, really trying to supplant or eliminate fossil fuels in a hurry. Who knows what human creativity will do in energy in the years and decades ahead. But climate policies that really want to eliminate fossil fuels as fast as possible really undermine the wellsprings of this glorious transformation of the human condition.
Now, these are not stupid people, and they know this, they know the value of this energy. What's their agenda then?
Power and control.
Control to what end?
To control economies, to control individual human lives, and it has been from the beginning. The United Nations didn't create the climate change or global warming issue, but they institutionalized it in the vast apparatus of the United Nations. It was preceded by efforts about sustainability, that we were going to run out of resources and energy. Before that, it was the issue was threats of overpopulation. And all of those, the first two didn't really gather the traction, and then the move to climate change really have to all do with the same things, that human beings somehow are living in a way that will destroy, the mechanics of our planet for life. And the solution is always all-powerful government that allocates resources. Don't let greedy, stupid human beings allocate resources. Let smart, enlightened people in governments allocate resources and control our lives.
The suppression of technologies. Have you looked into that phenomenon?
Well, not too deeply, but the way I would respond to that question is, I think the best technologies have come from risk-taking entrepreneurs or scientists using their own resources and not dependent on government grants. So I think the boom in oil and gas production in the United States most recently, which is a really turning point in history of energy, was all from, done by private independent oil and gas energy companies that refined these technologies and took them several decades to do so. It wasn't from government grants. It wasn't the global major oil companies, Exxon, Mobil, and the rest. It was nimble, risk-taking energy entrepreneurs. On the other hand, I think that government chooses winners and losers by choosing to subsidize one kind of emerging technology rather than the other. We've seen in the last 7 or 8 years massive amounts of taxpayer money subsidizing wind and solar. And that actually prevents, I think, an improvement of the technology because they have a guaranteed income. The lights stay on, the employees get paid because the government money keeps coming, whether the technology is improving or reaching a really critical point for development. So I think that the best gains is for everybody to be on a level playing field rather than government intervening with taxpayer money to choose this technology to support versus that. I think if you let the economy operate, give you an example, ethanol, we would never had a federal law to mandate using 40% of the U.S. corn crop for transportation fuel if it wasn't heavily subsidized, mandated, and with barriers to imports. Now they've changed a couple of those.
There's several speakers, and Tim Ball and others have talked about the fact that the probability that there's a population reduction program. Have you given some thought to that?
You mean that the government would impose?
Yeah.
That's, as I was saying earlier, through all these, first of all, concern about overpopulation, second, sustainability. The problem was there were too many of us. And then with climate change too, it's too many of us, too many of human beings. It discussed things like that in earlier years. That's not in relation to climate change, but it has been among those that think too many human beings will destroy the planet for the rest of us. Yeah, it was in the Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb, once said, and this would almost be a quote, I may not have it right, he said, giving abundant energy to individuals is like giving a machine gun to an idiot child, and that's the phrase he used, machine gun to an idiot child. Very different, I have a very different conception of the value of the human individual, each one of them. And our Constitution speaks of the inalienable rights of each human individual. But here's the good story. There was extremely rapid population growth in the developing countries in the earlier part of the the last half of the 20th century. That now is slowing. As education and other programs, the rate of growth in China, in India, and other places is slowing on its own. So
there's one aspect that confuses me and concerns me, and that is geoengineering to address the problem of perceived global warming. The hoax of global warming is being addressed by people like David Keith at Harvard and others by saying we can aerosol spray and we can address this problem. What are your thoughts on that phenomenon?
Well, because I don't think it's a vexing problem.
What is not a vexing problem?
Global warming. I find that to be such extraordinary human arrogance to imagine at this point in time we can re-engineer the climate system in which this planet operates. I think, and what a waste, in a way, to me, a waste of science, although in pure research can always have some kind of value. But there's so much we do need to know about our climate system. The sun and how the sun affects our climate is not well known. There was a great book written by a German climate scientist called The Neglected Sun that talks about this, and it's a fascinating book. And he said that in all the, these many years of the IPCC climate science, there's very little about the role of the sun. It just kind of set aside. Well, it's the most dominant force. It holds all the energy in our climate, and so I think we actually should continue climate science, but one, away from the auspice of the United Nations, and it needs a new paradigm. That's a word a fine climate scientist, Judith Curry from Georgia Tech, uses, that this paradigm of all the models with the assumption of great climate sensitivity to the very slight increase of CO2 emissions as it's not reinforcing itself. We need to look more broadly at the multiple variables in climate, and I think much could be gained there. But the client assignments under which, interests in global treaties and exorbitant carbon reduction rules comes from, it assumes that this relatively small amount of additional CO2 from human activity alters the whole thing. And you've got water vapor, clouds, the sun, all of that. And that assumption has driven the science. It's driven the funding for science, because people who wanted to study the influence on the sun, that wasn't the perimeters of for the government grants. It was how, it was about predicting the amount of loss of sea ice or something like that. Didn't really get to ask the heart of the question: how do these variables operate?
Willie Soon seems to have been picked out for major vilification. Do you think that's because he's close to really understanding and putting forth a theory that people can understand? The sun is dominant?
I think that's very well the case, and as said earlier in this conference, I think these witch hunts, which have really harmed many people in Europe and here, are because there's something to what they're saying.
And there are a lot of them here that are those heroic people.
It's incredibly widespread, and it's often not just from political activists. It is imposed by the universities themselves. And with that sort of scientific method attitude by the university itself, that's very alarming. Because
and how does that creep down into the lower levels, the grade school and the high school, in terms of their understanding of science and in particular meteorology?
I'll tell you, and I just read about this. One thing, it was in the Wall Street Journal, maybe not, but our Federal Department of Education does curriculum to be used, all over the country. And they had not done a new one for the science curriculum from, I think it was 8th grade to graduation from high school. And what this article is about, that this new curriculum went straight to the orthodox man-made global warming, here now, going to destroy everything unless we rapidly eliminate any fossil fuel use. So that's in Department of Education's. And people, some states, I know, I am from Texas, and I know we don't use too many. You don't evidently have to use the federal curriculum, but most states does. But that's what I mentioned today about the global warming, climate change policies. It's more, we've got the facts on our side, hard facts, but it's getting institutionalized, like in school curriculum, in one after another of EPA rules, in court decisions, and perhaps in an international agreement in Paris. So that to me is alarming, that we've let just the way our legal system works and our educational system has absorbed, I think, these misunderstandings.